Hi again. I want to talk to you today about the time, times, and half a time. There's a lot of ideas out there about what the time, times, and half a time are, but the Bible tells us exactly what they are. And it's not a 3.5 year period like many people believe. No, the Bible tells us what the time, times, and half a time are. And we're going to take a look at that today. The time, times, and half a times are mentioned twice in the book of Daniel and once in the book of Revelation. So it's important to understand what Daniel says about them, because Revelation is in the New Testament. Looking back, we have to have a definition of what the time, times, and half time are in Daniel in order to understand what Revelation 12 is talking about, because Revelation 12 mentions the time, times, and half time. So in order to understand that, we need to go back to Daniel and see what Daniel was talking about. What were the time, times, and half a time that Daniel referred to in the Old Testament? One of the two times that the time, times, and half a time is mentioned in the book of Daniel is in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 7. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swear to him that lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half, or some versions say a time, times, and half a time. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Now that's very confusing, and you'll see a bunch of different interpretations of what this means. But really, this is the Old Testament, and the people who would understand this best are the Jews. The Jews who understood the Hebrew better than any of us do today. They would have known what Daniel was saying here better than any of us. And they had documents that were handed down through generations. And they knew what Daniel was saying here. So the best thing to go to understand this verse is the Jewish Bible. So if we go to the Jewish Bible, we read here in the Jewish Bible in Daniel 12 verse 7, and I heard the man clad in linen who was above the waters of the river, and he raised his right hand and his left hand to the heavens, and he swore by the life of the world that in the time of 2 times and a half. Well, hold on a second. That's exactly what is translated as the time, times, and half a time in the NIV version. This is the time, times, and half a time. It says, in the time of 2 times and a half. And when they have ended shattering the strength of the holy people, all these will end. Now, hold on a second. This is totally different than what we read in the King James Version. In the King James Version, it said, it shall be for a time, times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. The Jewish Bible says that in the time of 2 times and a half, now notice that's not 3.5 of anything. It just very plainly says the time of 2 times and a half. And when they have ended shattering the strength of the holy people, all these things will end. Well, obviously the holy people is Israel. This is the Old Testament, and this is being told to Daniel, and the strength of the holy people would be Israel. So when they have ended shattering the strength of the holy people, when would that be? Well, Israel got all their land back and got Jerusalem back in 1967. So when will all these end? They will end when they have ended shattering the strength of the holy people. That was 1967. This is referring to the 2 times and a half that are referred to as the time, times, and half a time in the NIV. That people always refer to as the time, times, and half a time. They think it's 3.5 of something. Well, here we see that the Jews who knew the Old Testament better than any of us do, they say, the Jewish Bible says that it's 2 times and a half. And it's referring to when they have ended shattering the strength of the holy people, which would be 1967. Well, what would the starting point be? Obviously, there's no starting point given, so it would be the time that Daniel got this vision. Because this angel is telling Daniel, he swore by the life of the world that in the time, from what time? In the time of 2 times and a half, well, he'd have to be talking for the time he's talking about right now. When this vision was given to Daniel until the ending of the shattering of the strength of the holy people, which we know is 1967, will be 2 times and a half. Well, when was this vision given to Daniel? If we go back to Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, it says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. This whole vision from chapter 10 to chapter 12, this is all given in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. What year is that? That's 534 BC. So the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, is 534 BC plus 2,500 years is 1967. So the 2,500 years would appear to be the times and a half. It says 2 times and a half. And it says that between 534 and 1967, which is what this vision was talking about in Daniel chapter 12, that is a 2,500 year period. 534 was the third year of Cyrus. 1967 is when the shattering of the holy people ended. They got Jerusalem back. They got all their land back in 1967. That's 2,500 years. So 2 times and a half would have to be referring to 2,500 years, which means 1 time would be 1,000 years. Do we have any other references of the times, and half time? Yes, we do. The times, and half time is also mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, starting at verse 23, it says, "Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it to pieces." We know this is the Roman Empire. If you read over this, study this chapter, you know that the fourth beast is the Roman Empire. "And the 10 horns out of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall rise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change the times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and the dividing of time." Now this is once again referred to in the NIV as a time, times, and half a time. And this is the same phrase mentioned in Daniel chapter 12. That is translated 2 times and a half in the Jewish Bible. So what's he referring to here? He's referring to the Roman Empire. And it says that one of these 3 kings, one of these rulers, shall speak great things against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Well, he's talking to Daniel. Once again, who would the saints of the Most High be? If he's talking to Daniel in the Old Testament times, he's talking about Israel. He shall wear out Israel and think to change the times and laws. Well, were the times and laws changed? Yes, the Jewish calendar, the New Year's were determined by the new moon. Is that the case in the Roman calendar? No. The Roman calendar goes by the sun, the cycles of the sun. So the times have already been changed by the Romans. The Romans changed the times. The times and laws were changed by the Romans. Our whole calendar was changed. The start of the year was changed. The first year on the Jewish calendar is not the first year on the Roman calendar. The times and laws have been changed by the Roman Empire. This has already happened. So yes, they did think to change the times and laws, and in fact they did. "And they shall be given into his hand." Now who's he talking about? The saints of the Most High. He's talking to Daniel. That would be the Jewish people. That would be Israel, the Jews. "They shall be given into his hand." Who would his hand be? That's the king that is referred to as one of the kings of the Roman Empire. "They shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and the dividing of time." Well, when would that be? Israel was under the control of the Roman Empire, under the control of everyone except themselves until 1948. 1948, they were given their own land. So this is referring to the time that they were given into his hand. This isn't talking about the shattering of the strength of the holy people. This is talking about the time they were given into his hand. They got their own land back in 1948. And that would be what this is referring to. This time, times, it says until the time, times, and half a time. And we know this is 2 times and a half. This is the same time, times, and half a time that was referred to in Daniel 12:7, that we know is talking about 2 times and a half, according to the Jewish Bible. So the Jewish people shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and half a time, would be referring to the time until 1948, because that was when Israel got their own land, their own country. They were no longer no longer given into the hand of the Roman Empire. They had their own country starting in 1948. So when is this vision given? It says until a time, times, and the dividing time. So until, once again, would have to be from the time this vision is given. A starting point is not given. So the Israelites would be given into the Roman Empire's hand until a time, times, and the dividing of time, which we know is the 2 times and a half, 2,500 years. So when was this vision given to Daniel? If we go up to verse 1, it says, Daniel chapter 7, verse 1, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream." Well, what's the first year of Belshazzar? That was 553 BC. Well, since the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, was 553 BC, And it was a time times and a half. We know it's 2 times and a half is what this is referring to. This time times and a half time. 553 plus 2,500 years equals, well, wouldn't you know, 1948. So we have 2 references in Daniel that both refer to the time times and a half a time as being 2 times and a half, a 2,500 year period. So we have 2 references. Whenever something is stated twice in the Old Testament, you can take it to the bank. It's twice referred to as 2,500 years, the time times and a half a time. That the NIV calls a time times and a half a time. The Jewish Bible calls it 2 times and a half. So do we have any references to a time being 1,000 years? That's the question then, because we see that the time times and a half a time in the Old Testament is 2,500 years. And there's really no doubt about it. There's 2 different scenarios where it's given. The time times and a half time is referred to as being 2 times and a half, and they're both 2,500 year periods. And we'd have to have some kind of reference to a time being 1,000 years. Well, do we have any references to a time being 1,000 years? Well, 2 Peter chapter 3, it says in verse 8, "But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as one day." Now, if we look at this in the Interlinear Bible and we see what the Greek is actually saying, it tells us, "This should not be hidden from you, beloved, that one day," and that's the word hamera, "with the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like," and then there's that word hamera again, one hamera. So one hamera is 1,000 years. So this is a reference to the word hamera, and hamera here is referred to as being a day. Now, if we look at this word hamera, 12 times hamera is referred to as time in the New Testament. So here we see that a hamera can be translated as a time, and let's see what some of those references look like. Luke 23:7 in the King James says, "And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at that time." We saw that word time is hamera. Hamera, time hamera. And then we saw in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, that one day, and that's hamera, one time is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one time, hamera, day or time. So hamera can be day and it can be time. It can be both things. And this reference is referring to the end times, because he says in verse 7, "But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men." He's talking about the day of judgment. And then he immediately says after that, "But one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as one day." And then it talks about how the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, a promise of his coming, and saying that he's long-suffering, not wanting anyone to perish, but all to come to repentance. And then he mentions the day of the Lord in verse 10. So we see here that the time times and a half a time that is referred to in Daniel as a 2,500 year period, that time can very well be a hamera. Day or hamera is time as well. It's a day or a time. In other words, this very verse by Peter could have been translated that one time is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one time, because hamera can be translated either time or day. So when we look at Revelation chapter 12 and we see the time times and half time mentioned, we know it's referring to the time where before Israel got all their land back and got Jerusalem back. It's talking about that time period. In verse 10, it's talking about when Jesus rose from the dead, because it says, "Now is come the salvation and the strength of the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ." All those came when God raised Jesus from the dead. Remember, power here is authority. That's actually the word authority. The authority of Christ came when God raised Jesus from the dead. The salvation came when God raised Jesus from the dead. The power, that strength there is power. The power of God is for the salvation of those who believe. That's the gospel. The gospel is the power of God for the salvation of those who believe. Now has come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God. We know that we were translated into the kingdom of God. We were translated out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his dear Son, we're told in the New Testament. And the authority of his Christ, we know that came when God raised Jesus from the dead, because Ephesians 1 says that when God raised him from the dead, he seated him at his right hand, far above all rule and authority, power, dominion, and every name that can be named. So all these things happened when God raised Jesus from the dead, and I've given whole messages about that. And at that time, Satan was cast out of heaven. Satan was cast out of heaven when God raised Jesus from the dead, and so this is referring to Jesus' ministry up until then. The first mention above of 1,260 days is talking about Jesus' ministry. Jesus' ministry was 1,260 days long. And we know that the woman is Israel, and the wilderness, Jesus referred to his ministry as being in the wilderness at least 3 or 4 times during his ministry. He referred to his ministry as being in the wilderness. And I've given messages about that as well. And we know the woman is Israel. So Israel in the wilderness, in Jesus' ministry, 1,260 days. That's his Jesus ministry. Then it talks about Jesus raising from the dead in verse 10. We know there was spiritual war in heaven while Jesus' ministry was going on, and that when Jesus rose from the dead, Satan was cast out of heaven. He no longer has a place in heaven. He can't accuse us before God anymore because his accusation was based on the law. The law was canceled. And Satan has no longer any means by which to accuse the brethren. Because remember, it says in verse 10, the accuser of our brethren is cast down, and is talking about the devil and Satan. He's the accuser of the brethren. Well, what did he use to accuse us? The law. The law was what he used to accuse the brethren. So the accuser of the brethren was cast down when God raised Jesus from the dead. And after that, wouldn't you know, that's when it's mentioned in verse 14, to the woman, Israel, were given the 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time. This is the only other mention of the time, times, and half a time in the entire Bible. There are 2 times in Daniel that are both referring to 2,500 year periods until Israel got their land back and until they became a nation again in 1948. So it's referring to 1948 and 1967 in the 2 prophecies by Daniel. And here we see that Israel, the Jews, they are nourished for a time, times, and half a time. And part of that time was in the wilderness of Jesus' ministry. And she was in her place, and she was nourished even when they lost Jerusalem in 70 AD and they were no longer a nation in 70 AD. They were still there. They were dispersed into the nation, and she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time until she became a nation again. Israel became a nation again in 1948 and got all their land back in 1967, and that is the time, times, and a half a time that Daniel was referring to. So I've given many messages on Revelation chapter 12 in the past, and I'll probably give another one in the future. But this is just an explanation of the time, times, and half a time. So this has already gotten pretty long, and I've already explained the idea that the time, times, and half a time is 2,500 years. It's 2 times and a half. And this is not me saying this. This is the Jews saying this, the people who wrote the Jewish Bible. You think they were Jewish Bible scholars? You think they knew the Hebrew? They knew it better than any of us do today. These were the Jewish Bible scholars who wrote the Jewish Bible, and they say that it's 2 times and a half, and it's until the shattering of the strength is ended. So it's totally different in the Jewish Bible, and I believe what the Jewish Bible says before I believe what our Bible scholars say, because our Bible scholars have screwed up numerous translations in our Bibles. Like, for instance, in Matthew 8:17. Matthew gives an interpretation of Isaiah 53:4 that is totally different than our Bible scholars gave. And who do you think's translation was right? Obviously, Matthew knew the Old Testament Hebrew better than any of our Bible scholars do today. And his translation has got to be better than our Bible scholars were. Their translations are what you see in the King James and the NIV. And if you look at what the Jewish Bible says, the actual Jewish scholars, they say it's 2 times and a half. The time, times, and a half time is 2 times and a half. And it's clearly referring to 2 2,500 year periods. Both times in Daniel 7 and in Daniel 12, it's referring to 2,500 year periods. And then we have, of course, 2 Peter 3:8, which tells us that a day, or a hemera, which can also be translated time, is 1,000 years, is like 1,000 years. And 1,000 years are like a hemera, which can be translated day or time. The evidence is pretty overwhelming that a time, times, and half a time is 2,500 years, and it's referring to the time until Israel got their land back and when they became a nation again in 1948. And that clarifies Revelation chapter 12 for us and tells us when it happened. People are often thrown off by this because they think that Revelation 12 is talking about the future, because they take one verse in Revelation chapter 1 and misinterpret it. Remember in Revelation chapter 1, it says in verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show his servants those things which must shortly come to pass, and he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John. Now, people say, well, see, this is all written to show his servants what must shortly come to pass. That's the reason Revelation was written. That's not telling you the contents of the book. It's telling you the reason. God gave it unto Jesus Christ. It says the revelation of Jesus Christ, God gave it to Jesus too. In other words, the reason God gave this revelation was to show his servants that which must shortly come to pass. That's not telling you what's in the book. It's telling you why the things are in the book. Why it's written is it is written to show his servants the things which must shortly come to pass. Then to actually see what's in the book of Revelation, you have to go down to the end of the chapters and see what Jesus told John to write down. Jesus said, I am he that lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of hell and death. Write the things which you have seen. So he has to write down the things which he's already seen here. He saw Jesus, and he saw the candlesticks, and he saw all these things. Write the things which you have seen and the things which are. So the book that he's going to write now is going to consist of things which are and the things which shall be hereafter. So this tells you that the book of Revelation contains things which already are and things which shall be hereafter. It's not all in the future. The reason for the book is stated in verse 1, where it says the reason it was given was to show his servants the things which must shortly come to pass. That doesn't mean everything in the book is in the future. It means that's the reason the book was given to Jesus and it was shown to John. So obviously, many of the things that are in the book of Revelation are not in the future. And they're things that already are, because the Bible told us that. Revelation itself tells us that in chapter 1. He told John to write down both the things which are and the things which shall be hereafter. Now, by saying that and the things which shall be hereafter, he's telling us that some of the things in the book of Revelation already are. Otherwise, he wouldn't say and the things which shall be hereafter. So obviously, the book of Revelation contains both things which already are and things which shall be hereafter. But the reason it was written was to show his servants what must shortly come to pass. That was the reason the book was written. Not everything in the book of Revelation is in the future. And that's important in understanding Revelation 12. Otherwise, you'll be thrown off by Revelation 12. But if you take the whole Bible in context, you see that Jesus rose from the dead and Satan was cast out of heaven at exactly the same time. And we see that the times, and half a time is referring to the time until Israel got their land back and when they became a nation again, 1948 and 1967. That's when the times, and half a time is referring to. So I could go much further into this and do a whole thing on Revelation 12, but I've done that numerous times. If you want to watch some of my videos on Revelation 12, I've made numerous videos on Revelation 12, and they explain all this. But that's my message for today. Thanks for watching.